excited to really have you, and we are very greatly appreciative for this historical moment, first of its kind, bringing all the employers and the government agencies helping the refugees and immigrant communities. Today's refugee is tomorrow's citizen. They are in the path of U.S. citizenship and providing a lot of help to our economy. And we are indeed thankful to our sponsors for sponsoring such a very important event. What you'll be learning from this session this morning, we have very powerful speakers who are really subject matter experts, which are going to introduce them in a minute. What the refugees and immigrant community will bring to the workforce as an employer, the incentive you are going to have as why you really should hire the refugees and how you could help them remove such barriers that may impact their path of successful employment. First, I want to introduce you my good friend, Dr. O'Connor, Mary Helen. Where your hand, please? Dr. O'Connor is an assistant professor at Georgia State University at Perimeter College. She served as a senior faculty associate for the Office of International Initiative and assistant professor of English at Perimeter College. She has been named in 2018 as the recipient of two prestigious university awards, one Georgia Ames Sparkus Award and Carl D. Parent President Award for Community Service, Social Action, and Outstanding Faculty Award in the category in 2018. Since 2007, Dr. O'Connor, she has served and worked with the community partners, started to a summer intensive literacy program and expand after school programming and mentor refugee students, which I really personally witnessed, seeing a lot of refugees coming to their office day and night. The door is open, wide open. Anytime they walk in, they're only considering like their mom. They bring their personal problem to her beyond their education. And she's a very, very big asset for the state of Georgia State University, soul of our community. Second, we have another very dynamic, effective partner and outstanding expert with the refugees community. Karen, where you at? Karen Davies has over 20 years experience teaching immigrant and refugee students. She has taught for Orange County Public School in Orlando and helped write curriculum in adult education for the state of Florida. Karen worked as a contractor for companies such as Disney, teaching English to employees in a workplace. She continued to provide teaching professional development training in the area of theater and literacy. Karen has a BA in English and MA in education. She teaches English, citizenship, workforce education in Clarkston and Atlanta. Her goals for her students are for them to know their strength and passion and provide access so they can meet their potential. She is one of the dynamic helping the refugees really be as successful, and she is in depth, handles on issues related to refugees. So with that being said and introducing, and I'm going to open out some questions, and then later on also open the floor for you. Communication works both ways. It works both ways. So you will have ample opportunity to ask any question. No question is off table. So the first question I'll ask Dr. O'Connor, what is the legal definition of refugee? How refugees are resettled in America?
Ooh, I teach this, so we can talk about this all semester.
Right.
But first of all, we have, do you all know who he is? So Imam Wazir needs to introduce himself, but he is a major asset to Clarkston. He's a community organizer. He me, walks around and helps anybody that needs help, and he's actually the one responsible for bringing all of the partners together to make this event happen. So and he never takes the credit, but he is always introducing, and he is the biggest networker in the community that I know. So he also needs to be recognized. So a refugee is it's a legal it's also a political category, but a refugee is protected by the government and is brought here at the invitation of our federal government, and because of that, they receive legal protections that other immigrants may not have. So they have the right to work, the right to have an education. They have basically all the same legal rights and responsibilities that a citizen does. And so after a refugee is brought to the United States, they go through a period of resettlement, and then they have the option to pursue citizenship after a certain amount of time. Refugees are vetted extensively before they are selected to be resettled in any country. So that happens through the International Organization of Migration. My refugee friends will joke with you about how many times they've had to be vaccinated because they have to go through extensive medical exams at both the international level, and then once they are resettled here in the United States, they have 90 days to go to the Board of Health and have, they get a mental health screening, a physical screening. There's all sorts of stuff I could tell you about in the weeds, but what I will tell you is they're the most vetted group of immigrants that come to the United States, and we have resettled 3 million refugees since the passage of the Refugee Act in 1980, and none of them have committed an act of terror. And I think it's important for us to be clear about the facts around certain groups of people because there's so much misinformation. And so I have this talk with my mother frequently so that she understands the differences between immigrants, legal immigrants. I don't like the word illegal immigrant. I don't think a person should be called illegal, but refugees specifically, and I'm just so you get an idea, because we all live here in Metro Atlanta, we have one of the largest growing foreign-born populations in the United States. So even though the refugee resettlement program is being cut at the federal level right now, it's actually one of the fastest growing populations in DeKalb County. So we have lots of young refugee families and immigrant families here in DeKalb County. There are speakers and folks from, I think, how many different countries?
Over 8.
Yeah, it's very high. So the
In
diversity.
Clarkston alone, 87 languages being spoken. Small city, 87 languages.
But that's also something to think about in terms of the metro area, because we have, that impacts all of us wherever we live, even in the corridors towards North Georgia. As people come to Clarkston and they do a second or third migration out to different parts, and so those of you who live on the north side of the state, you'll see different kinds of immigrant groups that are living in communities kind of out the Buford Highway corridor. So.
Yeah. And I'll follow on that. The second question would be, what does a low-income family refugee families look like?
Can I go through my little data thing? Okay, so I'm gonna get really nerdy and academic on you. I prepared this. So part of my frustration here in Clarkston has been that nobody really had done any sort of data collection, and everybody used to talk about, well, this is what we know, this is what we see. So my colleagues here, we put together a research study, and I'm just going to briefly go through kind of what we learned about the people who, so this is the information, these are the data points that I think can help you understand the community that you're getting ready to meet and to hopefully hire. So there's not very much community level research I don't want to get to, but we surveyed 136 refugees this past spring that were using the free health clinics in the community. This is largely where the countries of origin of the people that we surveyed in Clarkston. And I think this is important for you to know. So there are lots of women who would like to work. There are lots of women in Clarkston who are not employed. We have low, basically, educational attainment within the community. 9 years is about the average. So you're talking about people who have gaps in education or who have low in educational attainment. I also think it's important for you to know that although nationally the statistics around unemployment are very, very low, they're very high in this community. So of the refugees that we surveyed, only 41% of them were employed. And here's the answer to the Imam's question. The average household income was $15,000. So we're talking about a large group of the population here is living below the poverty line. The reason I think that's important is because I have been looking through things at the lens of health because we've been working through a large public health grant that we just received from the CDC. And what joins everything that we're talking about here is that actually their language proficiency is directly related to poor health outcomes, access to education, and why you're here, access to jobs. So refugees come and they get a little bit of introductory English. But what we're finding out is that the language proficiency barriers are affecting everything. They affect whether they can get a job that is more than an hourly wage to get benefits, to get past, it's like a glass ceiling that they cannot kind of overcome. And so what our lens, the lens that we investigated was related to health outcomes. So this is what people do in Clarkston. So 36% of the people we surveyed were in factory jobs, 16% industry-related, cleaning, daycare, construction. I'm not sure, we had a whole bunch of, I can't really specifically break down the other, but there were quite a lot of people in that category. And this is the other big data point I want to show you. So one of the problems we face in our community is that we have lots of people who can work, but we don't have many places or opportunities for them to work, which is why you're here. So within this area, there really are not a lot of businesses that employ people. So if you have limited English proficiency, you really don't have a car or access to reliable transportation, and you can't walk to your job, this is one of the big problems that we face right here in this community. I think this is another point I wanted, these are some important, so the public health lens talks about social determinants of health. So the things that make people and communities healthy are good jobs. And that's what we know most of the folks around here need. And it affects everything from how much money they have in their household to transportation, and the intersection of all these things are what make it difficult to move beyond that socioeconomic barrier. So what we learned was that 74% of the people in Clarkston that we surveyed needed help with money, but they didn't know who to ask. 70% would like to have job training. They don't really feel like they have access to job training to get them beyond sort of an hourly wage job. Help with housing, and 78% didn't know where to get legal help. So these are all things that we know. And just to sum it up, this is where we are. This is why we're here in this session. Limited English proficiency is sort of the thing that needs to be addressed to move people beyond where they're stuck. So it helps them get more education, it helps them get a better job, and it actually overall improves their health, which is kind of probably something that I wasn't expecting to explore as an English professor, but now that I understand that language seems to be the thing that's driving all of this disparity, it has become the focus. So one of the things, and I think Karen will probably talk about this, what we know, so you're probably saying, well, so what am I supposed to do about it? Wraparound service providers, like a lot of the resettlement agencies that are here, we know that folks are not going to just come attend a class. So if you offer an English class, which we have, a standalone, continuing ed, or whatever kind of English class, typically you're not going to get a high amount of participation in that for a lot of reasons that we can talk about. So employer-sponsored language instruction is huge, and we've seen a few models of it working around the state. So when people have language instruction tied to their employment, it actually works. We know that language instruction contextualized for the workplace is actually the fastest way for adults to learn better English, and you can even see it. In the last 5 years, I've been working with lots of recently arrived Syrians, and they're all like, Dr. O'Connor, how do I learn English faster? I'm like, get a job. Because that is what, when you're sitting there on a job, you gotta learn how to communicate. And if you're sitting at home watching TV, that's not gonna help you. So those are the partnerships that we hope to develop more of. I think that the benefits for you all are everybody, and they're going to talk about ROI in that other session, but we know this, we have the research and data to support it. Refugees have great loyalty. They have higher retention rates than native-born employees. There's increased productivity. It's an average of 3 or more hours weekly when you improve an employee's language skills. It is an improvement for workplace safety, which is something is so logical that you just don't even think about, like, oh yes, of course, that would make sense if people could communicate. Another specific example of that is that I've assisted in many situations where refugees who had been here 5, 10 years did not have enough language proficiency to call 911 and explain what was going on, and it had some severe impact. And then finally, it promotes a culture of inclusion in your workplace. Okay, so that's all my geeky answer to your question.
Thank you so much. And I have one more question, but I'll come back to you at a couple times, please.
No, you can't.
Thank you so much, Dr. O'Connor.
I'm gonna sit down, don't worry.
Okay. No problem. Karen, as you are really working a lot with the refugees, could you tell us and walk us through your ESL program and their productivity for the survival of English related to their work?
How does the English class
Right.
create or foster their outcomes in their jobs?
Yes.
Yeah, so my students are women and they want to work. So a lot of our curriculum revolves around what they're interested in, what passions they have, and sometimes they don't even know, they just think, I'm a mom, this is what I do, and they rely on their husbands for work. So many of the husbands get sick, some of them divorce. So I really talk about empowering yourself and being skilled at knowing about financial literacy, workforce education. We have a lot of books, and one thing I want to stress is that there's a lot of curriculum out there for workforce education that I think sometimes companies want to maybe purchase, or they're like, oh, we can get this book and this will take care of it. But really, a skilled teacher knows their students. So I just want to be careful with that when you hear about programs, because really the teacher is really the major influence. Research shows that the teacher makes the biggest impact on the students and their outcomes. So really getting to know the students, finding out what they did in their countries, telling them about my past, my background, my education. So I share a lot of myself and my process with them. I tell them about my grandparents were refugees, so we go through all of that and then find out where their strengths are. And I have a lot of students who are makers, like they know how to make things, and they're really good at that. So some of my students, we talk about business, and we partner. There's partnership with Emory called Start Me. So I help them get into that. We do the resumes. You talked about that earlier about how does a resume look? Even if you don't have experience, you were a mom. You are a mom. You manage your household. You manage the finances. So what are your strengths? So we really look at their strengths. Sometimes they don't see them, but I really try to bring that out. We do a lot of role play, practice interviews, practice conversations. We get online, so digital literacy is important. Many of my students do not know how to use a computer, are afraid of computers, and I tell them most places of work are all digital, so you need to learn it. So we use our phones a lot. They're pretty savvy with their phones, and I started this WhatsApp group. So we're all in WhatsApp, and I'll pose questions, I'll take pictures and write little captions, and they go out and take pictures and write captions. So I'm always getting them to write and speak and share together, find out their similarities. We have a lot of students from Burma and Ethiopia and Eritrea, And at the beginning of class, all the Burmese students are together, all the Ethiopian students, and we mix it up, and so they're not speaking the same, they're really working on their English. So I think that kind of gives them the self-esteem and also the skills to feel confident to even think about looking for work.
Could you also talk about the conference you attended about focusing on vocational ESL program?
Yes, I was in Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago, and it was Literacy Pittsburgh. This is the and Pittsburgh, I did not realize, is such a there are 466 bridges, which I didn't even know. That city has more bridges than any other place in the world.
Whoa.
And I don't know, I was thinking about it, like, this city is a very welcoming city.
How many people?
466. I'm making a
Oh, I've been there so
I'm
many
making a
times.
correlation here, but I really felt like it was and there's a huge immigrant population, huge immigrant refugee population in Pittsburgh. I felt like it was a very welcoming city, and I worked with the people at Literacy Pittsburgh, kind of like downtown Atlanta. They have many buildings, and they offer job training, ESL, citizenship, just kind of like what I do. We talked about workforce education, and we talked about the importance of having on-site education, and really getting to the nitty-gritty, really getting to what's the vocabulary of your company, because every company has a different culture, has a different vocabulary, and really looking at words and studying them. So we talked about, just like the word check,
Right.
check. Students have confusion about these words that have multiple meanings. So we had to think about how can you say check? What are the different ways to say check? And check it out, and you have a check, right? Like a bill. Students may be confused, workers may be confused on site. So really getting to words, focusing on words and vocabulary that might be used in the workplace, role playing, getting with, making sure that if you do have on-site training at your work place, that you make it flexible, that you make it so that the students can do it during the time that they're working, that they're not having to go home and come back later at night. Really working with the student schedule, working with the teachers to make sure that the vocabulary is matching up, that the curriculum is tailored for the students, and making it meaningful, not just relying on a textbook, but making sure that the students are, I have some students who they never miss work. Their husbands never miss work. They could have pneumonia, but they don't know how to call the doctor. They don't know how to call their employer. So they're coming to work, with pneumonia, which you don't really want. You don't really want that to happen. So really, how do I call, and how do I call in sick? So these kind of scenarios will play out in this kind of language class that you could set up at your workplace. And it depends on the level. You may have higher level students who have more technical type of speech that they need to use. But really creating this language-focused atmosphere so your students have time and practice to actually work with each other. And you said inclusive, making it more inclusive, that they, not only that we're welcoming refugees, because I see the sign everywhere, right? We welcome refugees, but really creating the support and facilitating and giving them that space to practice language. I don't know, I mean, sometimes we think they can learn in a 30 to 40 hour course, they could learn English, but I think the research says it could take 2 to 5 years, and to really be proficient, 5 to 8 years, 5 to 8 years to be proficient, at an academic level of English. So this is not a quick 6 week, we're gonna do English and everyone's gonna learn English. definitely our students are motivated. They're very, very motivated and they learn at a fast rate, but they really have to have time. They really have to be given the instruction as well. We talked about intonation, even like question marks, asking questions, emphasis on certain words. So, some of our speech is so like it's just difficult to understand if you don't put the right stress.
Right.
So having a teacher, a skilled teacher, talking about stress and modeling it for the students.
That's a great tip. Now, as I promised earlier, going to be both ways. It's an opportunity for you to ask the panelists. You can directly direct it to either Dr. O'Connor or Karen or to me if you have any question for me. So, go ahead.
I have a question.
First and second, please go ahead.
Okay, it was.
I'm sorry to also, if you would kindly introduce yourself.
My name is Khadija Black. I'm with the Census Bureau. And you were talking about, I used to work in Social Security, so I processed some refugees coming in. But I was wondering what happens, okay, you go through the whole process and then you're here. Is there like a refugee boot camp? Is there something that
It's a great question.
Go
So
here, do this, do this?
the whole resettlement process is driven by government grants from the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and they basically charge the resettlement agencies with getting families to self-sufficiency within 6 months. So you get Medicaid for about 6 months. You get supplemental, you can get SSI, whatever, for a limited time. But the whole program is to get them to self-sufficiency. Now the problem and the reason why we're sitting here right now is that you can get emergency, like the resettlement agency helps you get an apartment and helps you get to your first job and helps you get your kids in school and gives you some basic kind of ways to navigate the community. But if you looked at our research, the average time of the people that are here was 5 years. And so there are still persistent gaps, and the reason that we started to look at the community, the resettlement community, is for the very question. So once those benefits go away, people are largely economically self-sufficient, but they're not moving past a certain level. So they're not coming out of poor socioeconomic kind of. So what we're trying to do, and what the Imam and Friends of Refugees and everybody, is to try to move everybody up past that ceiling. And language proficiency is largely what keeps people from getting a better job, which keeps people from getting benefits, which keeps people going to the SSI office. Like, so getting people past that, and the bad news is that there really are not a lot of good community programs to teach people that sort of English, right? I teach at a university, so I largely see people who have really strong foundations in education. And the research tells us if you've been to school most of your life, learning a language is going to be easier. But for a lot of the folks that we serve in our community, if you've been living in a refugee camp, the average time people spend in transit in a camp now globally is over 20 years. And so camps and schools and camps are not great, right? So you can just kind of erase that. That is not quality instruction. So if you do not have basic foundational literacy when you are young, because you know the focus on early childhood in the United States, if you don't have that and you come here and you've got to cope, and I don't know, I was going to ask, how many of you guys have traveled to a country where you didn't speak the language within the last 5 years? What did it feel like?
Frustrated.
Very
So think about if you got plopped down somewhere permanently and you had to go out, get your kids in school, go find a job. Man, I was in France a few months ago and just going to the grocery store was hard for me. I was like, ah! And I took French for 6 years. But anyway, so that's a really good question, and it's also something that people hear misinformation in the media about, that these are people all on benefits, and that's absolutely not the case. So they are entitled to benefits for the first part of the time that they're here. Now there are special cases, and a lot of times we resettle refugees who have disabilities or who have special health circumstances. And so those folks, of course, receive benefits. But largely, refugees are not sucking the system dry like we hear about in the media. That's just a pure misinformation.
Karen, you're the
I just wanted to add just with my population of students, most of the husbands work in such factories, at the chicken factory. They say, my husband works at the chicken factory. For 5 years, they've been telling me, my husband works at the chicken factory. That's my student population of where they're working. And, sometimes I ask, does he like his work? And no, it's an hour. Well, no, they usually say, no, it's okay. It's okay. But it's an hour it's an hour and a half away, and, he's been working there 7 years. And I'm like, well, why doesn't he look for another job? There are other opportunities, and they mostly say he doesn't know any English. I'm learning the English, right? So I think it's an either or. Many of my families, they'll flip flop. If the wife is going to school, the husband's working. And they're really, it's like an all day. They'll see each other maybe for 30 minutes. The wife is preparing the food, getting the kids, and they switch, and the husband goes to work. They're sleeping all day, going to work at night. So it is because of limited English proficiency. But I feel like it's this bad cycle. It's like a bad cycle that they're stuck. They're stuck in this job. And I even think after 7 years, they probably do have some English and maybe not have the confidence yet to even think that they could, go on to another job.
Ma'am.
Well, my first question is,
I'm sorry. First,
oh, I'm sorry, I'm
your
Jennifer
name and your
Cummings,
company.
and I'm from MARTA.
Okay.
If we can possibly have access to your PowerPoint so we can advocate with our companies?
I think that's the reason y'all are here, and I would encourage you, and places like Georgia State, we have an intensive English program, and we have really great instructors. It's expensive. We have to pay our teachers, right? But I think that our university would be open to partnerships like that, where we are doing intensive English instruction. We've talked to the mayor's office. We have the knowledge. We just have to, and largely the problem is, you may know this, but Georgia Piedmont Technical College had a lot of ESL instruction. They've been through a lot of financial issues and organizational issues, and there have just not been a lot of really quality language instruction classes. If you leave here with anything, go to your companies and tell them that an investment to get better workers would be to provide language instruction at your job site, or to partner with someone that could.
And then, one of the things I was hoping to get out of this is, are there any skills that as a native English speaker, I can learn so I can communicate better with someone who isn't proficient in English so that I can help them get employed?
For sure, yes. And I mean, as an English teacher, I think we both know that it really takes a lot of patience and understanding on both parts that, and maybe coming at from a different perspective, that most of my students know 4 languages. So, if you're from Africa or Asia, you're going to probably know more than 1 language. And most of the people in the U.S. know 1 language, right? So that kind of shifting your perspective a little bit can kind of change the outlook. That these employees are coming with a lot of strengths and that a lot of skills and problem solving. So there's a lot of research on dual language and knowing multiple languages and how your brain is just it grows at like exponentially when you have more language. So the problem solving skills, so trying to find, so how do we communicate better? That's the question, how do you communicate better? I think it's really having an understanding that maybe you know things that I don't know. Maybe you have skills, maybe you have a skill set that we don't have here, that you could actually benefit us. The language might be a challenge right now, but we can work through that. We can work through that with visuals, we can work through that with practice and repetition. We could work, make team, like partnering with somebody else to kind of, did you understand that? So checking for comprehension, checking this, like, did you understand those directions? Making sentences a little more simpler, because we ramble on when we speak, right? So speaking in shorter sentences. I really think visuals and acting, I do a lot of acting in my class, so not being afraid to kind of be a little vulnerable in your like discussion and showing, so I do a lot of I bring a lot of visuals, depending, with MARTA, I'm not sure what kind of things, props, you could bring to show And having other people, you know, I always feel like other people are teachers as well, so making people feel like they have a leadership role in your workplace. So, you know, giving them that, like, you know, you can help advocate for each other, kind of relationship. But it really takes like like you're building this community that we're all working here together, and everybody has strengths. And, you know, language might just be the thing that you're working on at this time. So I think just kind of fostering this, a more inclusive community.
I think Karen's so right. I think I had a student tell me one time, I like to tell stories, that just the fact that I knew what his native language was changed his attitude. He was like, how do you know what Amharic is? So us being familiar with where folks come from and acknowledging that they bring so many things to the table that we don't even think about. And I think leveling that sort of communication helps people have a less defensive mode around trying to integrate and be fluent in our community. I really do think that Karen's right. It's a positionality and an attitude thing. Most refugees and immigrants have crossed multiple borders, multiple cultures, have to learn so many languages. How many do you speak?
9.
And so we don't. And we need to appreciate and acknowledge and be aware that if we promote that sort of inclusivity, they'll naturally learn the language. But I don't think that, especially right now in the United States, we have that attitude. So I think that that's the most important part, is what Karen said about creating the right sort of environment.
Appreciate it. Go ahead, Mark.
Good morning, I'm Dr. Few's Department of Juvenile Justice, and I'm a regional recruiter. So when we're out recruiting, we're recruiting entry-level positions like food service, housekeeping, and our JCOs, which are our juvenile correctional officers. We do have a department called Victim and Volunteer Services that we go out and we canvass the community. But however, when I'm out recruiting, we have all these entry-level positions. We are law enforcement. We're, you know, have youth in our youth detention centers. So you have to pass background, drug screening, and all of that. So how do we communicate or get with these potential applicants to help them migrate into the workforce, into the Department of Juvenile Justice? It is a state agency, it is a state employer, but we still have to have all those parameters that you have to pass. You have to have, you know, high school diploma,
My
GED.
student assistant's mom has worked down at the Russell building for, I think, 15 years.
Wonderful.
You actually have the best kind of jobs, I think. God, go hire people and give me your card. No, I'm serious.
I want to get your card and I want to give you mine because we have jobs.
Yeah.
And they, and you talk about moms, stay-at-home moms.
Yeah.
I mean, they might be, you know, entry-level positions like food service or housekeeping, but guess what? Those are the main streams of the facilities, and they can help the children that are in there, because that's what we want to do, is to rehabilitate them back into society.
Yes.
Because all of them, I mean, they're not bad, just a different kind. They're just different. So they might help them when we talk about language barrier, because they do have school. They are teaching foreign language in the school, so, you know, in the facility. So that might be a thing that we can do, and we can partner so we can mainstream them into the state, so they can get benefits.
And because you guys are a state agency, you know, I think it would be great for you to think about partnering with us, or some of the other state institutions who have some of those language skills based. The other answer to the question that you asked earlier too, in a particular workplace, so if you took juvenile justice, take your work environment and you came up with a vocab list of the key words and functions for a job, and you helped your employees understand those keywords that are specific to your job site, that's huge. We do that in English courses, just for like anything, just like Karen was talking about, English words can mean so many different things. So if you can really tailor some of your onboarding to whatever the job is specific to, so that people understand certain key terms and things like that. And you can work with professionals in linguistics. I've got, you know, faculty members here who specialize in ESL who could help work together to come up with something like that. Because, you know, onboarding is such a big thing right now, and that could be a part of your onboarding process. a lot of this stuff you could put online, you know, if you come up with these key, I have a list of like the 100 most used words in a composition classroom, and we use that with every immigrant student that I have. Like, these are the most used 100 words you're gonna see on a test. Well, you could probably find that specific to every industry that's represented in here and just focus on those terms.
This is
Appreciate it.
great, thank you.
And also in fairness to this side of the, you are overwhelmed over there, so I have to hear the chair over here, so this young lady over there, will you go ahead and tell us who you are and what company and the question you have?
My name is Anna Robinson, and I'm with Millennium Mac, I'm located in Swanee. We make floor mats. And my question is, well, we have a huge group of refugees working for us. We have 2 shifts. So we have a lot of people that don't really speak English that well. And we thought about doing an ESL program at the facility to kind of help bring in more people and also retain the ones we have. But our challenge is trying to figure out how to do it while they're working so they don't have to come back, because I know they struggle with transportation. But we haven't really been able to figure out how to successfully do it without losing too much time also on the production floor. I don't know if anybody has any experience or advice with that.
Karen, then
Yeah.
Dr. Kapana, if you have comments to update.
So I used to work in Orlando, and I was teaching for the public school system. And I also was a contractor at Disney. Disney, you know, the company Disney had huge hotels in Orlando, and they also had huge influx of refugees and immigrants.
Karen, just a little bit voice up, please.
Okay, so I worked, I worked as a contractor to teach the housekeepers. They had a lot of options, but I know Disney's a huge company. But just to give an example, they had a lot of options, like day options and night options for schooling. I have to say that the students came to school I taught at night. I taught during the day, middle and high school, and I taught adults at night. The housekeepers came every single night. It was Monday through Thursday. I had a ballroom, so I had about like 60 students come, and their English, it was really fast. I know it takes many years, but it was tailored, the vocabulary was tailored for their job, and like they were very happy. They were very happy with what they were learning, and there was better communication on the job. So I think it's really logistically trying to find out what best fits your company and their timing, but really making it accessible. There have been some success with online. I was doing a little research, and but it really is best with a live teacher. So I don't really recommend, putting your employees online and just like learning English. If it was with a live teacher that maybe they could do at home, that could be an option. I have done that before, and with some success, but I really think live, being in a classroom setting, is probably the best. But really finding that time, it is an investment, like you said, and it's a way to retain your employees.
I have 2 comments about that. One is that I'm seeing a lot of grant opportunities around this for employers, and I know employers don't usually think about grants, but I've seen a lot of grant-funded projects where companies have sought grant money to establish language programming as a wraparound with their employer services. The other thing I'll say is that language instruction in the state of Georgia is really not in great shape overall. We rank at the bottom of the 50 states. That's like K through 12, everything, so, and adult ed. The key to doing this well is to hire someone like Karen, who's a really great instructor. So there are lots of folks who think they can teach English, right? But to be really certified in ESOL and language acquisition, if you hire and make the investment, like I said, that the research tells us that your productivity on the production floor is going to increase if you make this investment. So you've got to convince your bosses, if we can find some funding to teach this kind of, to consider it job training, right? That you're going to increase your efficiencies if you invest in these language skills in your workforce. So
I think funding we're fine with. I mean, they're all on board to, bring an instructor. We met with the local colleges and everything, so we're on board with that. It's just the
we wanna make it accessible when they're there at their shift, so they can do it. The only bad thing is if we have half of our second shift population needing to go to class, then we can't afford to bring half of the shift off the line so they can learn English, and then what happens for our production and our numbers at the same time.
Can you just add an hour out, like front-ended or back-ended? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, give them some food. Anybody will do something for pizza.
Now, one more, is there anybody else from this group? Since the majority is happy to be that side of the room, if I would take
There's just
one last
more
question.
people.
One last question. Anybody last question from there?
No questions?
Now, I have the last two questions. I will say, Dr. O'Connor, what does your research shows in terms of long and short-term, the needs of the community or the refugee vis-a-vis the employers as well?
I think I talked about that a little bit already. The focus on refugee resettlement is short-term self-sufficiency, and we have not, as a community, done a great job of looking at long-term needs of this population and how can we really help integrate in terms of what do they need beyond the first year. So if you need employees, there is a great base of folks here who, like Karen said, want to work. I've never met or helped, I personally assist refugees all the time. Imam told you how my door is always open. I know their families. I've been here for many years. I know lots and lots of women who would like to work, but a lot of the adults especially just do not have the language skills. They just don't have the language skills. And largely, most of the refugees that are my friends and I've known, which there are hundreds, they stay in the same jobs forever. I mean, one of my sons, adopted Somali sons, his mom's worked at the chicken factory for 15 years, and she is not thinking about going anywhere. So, I mean, I can't understand it. She gets on the van. It's social to her. She actually likes it. She loves her job, and she's not gonna change. And so if you want a long-term, committed, loyal employee, they need the language instruction to make them employable. And so that's what I think the long-term solution here is, to tap into that 40% of the people in this community who don't have jobs.
If I ask all the employer one question that seems to be speaking for everybody, what are the needs of the employer vis-a-vis refugees or immigrants? We as a community servant, so we can go back and dig in and trying to meet your needs. If somebody can speak one that speak for all employers,
Well, I don't know if I can speak for everyone.
but
I'll say from my own perspective, I'm really excited to be here and partner with this group. My name is Louisa Twaddell. I'm the HR director for North America for NPSG Global. We're a specialty construction company. We are generally a low skilled construction company, so this is like bread and butter people to me. I'm excited, they're motivated to work, awesome. One of the anxieties I have is communication is one thing, safety communication is big, and then the next iteration of that, and of concern to anybody in the HR field, workplace norms. I'm putting these people in a new culture, a new setting with other people that may not be accustomed to that, right? And thinking about like harassment training, like how we get through those barriers as a collaborative workplace. You know, we're HR, I'm HR, so I think about risk and risk mitigation a lot. That's something that I see as a challenge, you know, communicating on how to get to work and what to do on the job, what not to do is really dicey for me. But overall, I know these people want to work and do a great job, so help me get past that. Is what I'm looking for.
you guys speak for every employer, I guess, right?
Yes, and
You all
also,
agree?
I would like to add that because we are law enforcement and we are a youth detention facility, because we have youth offenders, that's another thing for me. The language barrier, because if they bring in contraband, they could go to jail. So that's the other thing, you know, they might be there forever, being a housekeeper, being a grounds person, being a food service worker, which they are part-time, hourly paid, but still, you know, you have your tools that you use every day, and somebody might slip something in there that they're not aware of. So again, I hear what you're saying, so that's my thing as well, and my fear, that we need to try to help educate. So that's why I was talking about our victim and volunteer services, that might be a good start before we do hire them in the various facilities, along with the transportation. Because in the county, we have 5 different facilities that they could go to, but when they have to go through security, and they are locked, quote unquote, locked up as all day long. Yeah.
Even here at Georgia State, a part of my job is to do cultural competency training for our faculty and for students. So we send a lot of students out into the community to do practicum experiences, and I spend lots of my time training. So you, as hiring managers, have got to figure out how you can kind of integrate that into when you're onboarding folks like this, or actually when you're training your current employees. And I also think that you need to hit it straight head on with facts, information around, just like today when I told, shared what I know, what the facts are around this particular population. I think, you have to make the assumption that anybody coming onto a job, you don't know their background, you don't know anything. And so anything that they have to know about cultural norms or expectations, you've got to be really clear. And I would encourage you to work with someone who can be an interpreter, not just a translator. This is another big common fallacy. So if you cannot do kind of language instruction at your workplace, but you want to hire folks who are not fluent in languages, look for a good interpreter. So what's the difference between translation and interpretation? Anybody? Just guess.
1-to-1 versus 1-to-2.
Just guess, a little bit.
Context or
Okay, so translation is just word for word. So what I see a lot, I go to court with these folks, I go to everywhere. There's a lot of translation. Google Apps will translate for you. That is not telling you really what its interpretation is about, right? And you can use interpreters, and you can call me, I can get them for you, because they're my students. But I get calls all the time, can you send us someone that speaks, Korean or whatever? That is a huge thing. So when you're training people, if they're not going to need to learn lots of English, but you do need to get some certain points across, make sure you find a really good interpreter, not just a translator, because you also don't know if that person's really communicating what you're, especially when it comes to safety or it comes to legal issues and things like that. Do you have any advice about that? Because you do a lot of that kind of work. And the Imam used to be in social services. He was a social worker, so he knows.
Yeah, I do. You see, there is a lot of barriers in terms of communication between the employers and the employee in a number of ways. The cultural differences, the religious accommodations sometimes. I remember writing a letter to the employer to some Muslims worshiper who want to take off on Friday, and in lieu of exchanging the other days. So sometimes, as you know, Muslim women are put in scarf. I remember writing a letter to the airport. One woman actually was fired because she was put in the scarf. I said, what is the problem? What security threat does this piece of clothes bring into the workplace? Well, the manager said that I'm really making uncomfortable to the customers. I said, how so? So, and then you're on TV, come and talk to you, so you can be interviewed. Finally, just came to their conscience and said they really said they're back to work. So there are those kind of perceptions that I would say is wrong, need to be sort of accommodated. This is the United States of America, that are really need to embrace everybody and welcome them and give them the tools to succeed. We're not here harboring no terrorists. We're not here to harbor no wrongdoers. So, in the interest of time, if you give the mic to the preacher, I can talk. And my flash in the back, it shows me.
Add one thing, we're done.
My flash in the back, it shows me. The time is out. I had to cut it. I see that gentleman over there is patiently waving his hand. Will you go ahead and briefly question, comment you have, please?
Okay, I can ask afterwards, but hi, I'm Brandon Crumby, good morning, With SBR Premium.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask about a question that you mentioned earlier, language instruction on the job. Would it be beneficial to have someone on staff who has a TEFL, who is fluent in English, maybe to do language instruction? Or how would you, what resource would you recommend to do the actual language instruction?
Do you wanna get to it? I mean, you used to do it.
I mean, I think that would be fabulous if you feel like this would benefit, and to have an English instructor, as think of it from a training perspective, this is on-job, on-the-site training. So yes, someone with a TESOL certificate would be good, a master's in TESOL or language and literacy, somebody who knows their stuff, to be on board for sure.
And wrap it up, I'm sorry, that are kind of quick.
No, Georgia's, if you're looking for good teachers, Georgia State has a body of applied, lots of professors who, if they can't do it, can refer you to people who can do it, really well qualified, because we all belong to professional associations of teachers and instructors. So let us help you connect to the right people, because that's our research, it's what we do.
If I may, I'm sorry, if I may, did you finish? Sorry?
Yeah, no, I was just saying, what about TEFL? You say TESOL, but what about someone equipped with a TEFL certificate?
TOEFL, the
Yeah, like
TOEFL
a
test?
native English speaker, TEFL, teaching English as a foreign
Oh,
language.
teaching English as a, sure,
I'm wary of certifications. I think it's more about a person. So, I can teach.
you could get that
I can teach
online,
refugees and
too.
immigrants really well, and I don't have
Yeah.
a certification. No,
Yeah.
but I think you have to interview somebody, dig around.
I was saying, finally, let's then just a minute, each one of you. What final advice do you give for all employers, those who are here, those who are hearing this message via being recorded, so that they can take your advice and give you employment, give you childcare, whatever. If you would, each one of you, less than a minute, just what advice do you have?
What Dr. O'Connor was talking about, getting to know, and I said it too, really getting to know your employees and where they're from, making that connection, really finding out about their language as well, and then finding, within your staff, there might be, partnerships that you could create. So really seeing the wealth, giving them value, that they are a valuable part, and investing in language, that this is part of job training. This is gonna keep us afloat. This is gonna keep our business going, and for everyone, not just the immigrants and refugees, everyone needs some cultural training, and an understanding of one another.
The story of the United States is a story of immigrants who worked hard and have been successful. And I'm sad that we're at a point in our country where we do not value that, because every single person here came from somewhere else. And so I think if you can just advocate for that sort of perception. I know that my refugee and immigrant friends and adopted children and neighbors and people have brought more joy and love into my life than I can ever tell you or share with you. And I think that it's worth our investment. That's actually who we all are. And so it's our identity as a nation and as a community. The other academic nerdy part is that the research tells us that foreign-born students and employees outperform native-born. Sorry, it's just the facts. They make better grades, they are more loyal, they perform better on the job. So for you,
They stay in their job.
yes, they stay. Retention numbers are much higher. So for you to convince your companies that it is worth an investment if you want some long-term, really wonderful folks working for you. I really appreciate y'all coming. Thank you.
I would also, in conclusion, really want to thank every one of you. And I will say also, the refugees are here not to take the job of Americans. They are adding the jobs to the Americans. The refugees are here paying taxes that really revive the economy. Like, our national politicians try to put fears in Americans and say, oh, the immigrants are here taking the jobs. No. The immigrants are adding the jobs to the Americans. The immigrants are here adding to the economy of Americans. We are all together strong And with that being said, I really give applause to our speakers. And then lastly, disclaimer, if we could come together and take a picture, is that okay? Come together here.
He always
All right,
likes to do
yeah,
that.
let's go over there. Let's get together in the back. Take a picture.